Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome back to the poem of the day for today, Tuesday, August 5th, 2025. We're going to go to the 17th century today for our poem. It'll come from John Milton, who is one of the most famous and well regarded poets in the English language. If you know anything about John Milton, you probably know that he wrote Paradise Lost, the great poetic epic that reimagines and refigures the creation of man, Satan's falling out with God, and the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the garden. That's not what we're going to read today, though. But that poem has been calling back to me. I've read it in undergrad, and it seems like it's time to revisit that one. Today, though, we're going to read "When I Consider How My Light Is Spent," and this is a 14-line poem. It's a Petrarchan sonnet, and it was composed, people believe, nearer the middle of Milton's life. He lived from 1608 to 1674. However, it was published in 1673, so a year before his death. And I'm not sure if that's because he continued to tinker with it, or if this was just a matter of that's kind of the earliest date that they could find it in publication or circulation. In a sense, it's a kind of midlife crisis poem, but it's one that is unique and specific to Milton in that around 1660, he became completely blind. He had begun losing his sight over a period of time, and around 1660, it's believed he had completely lost his sight, which is remarkable considering that Paradise Lost is published in 1667, 7 years later. So Paradise Lost is composed entirely by Milton while he does not have his sight, which is remarkable to me because I can't imagine. When I write, and I'm not John Milton, it requires so much of seeing what's on the page, especially if you are attempting to do poetry or sonnet form specifically, and yet it all lived in his mind's eye, which I think is truly remarkable. So this poem is "When I Consider How My Light Is Spent" by John Milton. When I consider how my light is spent ere half my days, in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve therewith my Maker, and present my true account, lest he returning chide, "Does God exact day labor, light denied?" I fondly ask. But patience to prevent that murmur soon replies, "God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly. Thousands at his bidding speed and post o'er land and ocean without rest. They also serve, who only stand and wait." Okay. So this poem is, as I mentioned, a Petrarchan sonnet. So it has those two units in it of the octet and the sextet, beginning with the establishment of the problem in the first 8 lines, which is the speaker wondering or bemoaning why he is given a particular gift for poetry, but then is also afflicted with losing sight. Why would God call for me to be descriptive and to transform the things that I see and experience into wonderful lyrics full of rich imagery, and then take my sight away? This seems absurd. This seems contradictory. This seems particularly cruel. And thus, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to spend my days? Furthermore, if I'm just going blind at this point in my life, did I waste all of my time in my earlier days being a poet? Was that going down the wrong path? but it feels like I have this intense talent, and to shut it down, to hide it, would be like death, would be denying who I am, and would be an affront to my soul and my spirituality and expression. And a voice kind of answers in his head, right? Where he responds in the second part of the poem that God doesn't need your work or your gifts. You don't need to do those things in order to glorify God. There are a lot of people who do. There are a lot of people who toil. But it says, who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. And the last line, they also serve who only stand and wait. And so the voice that's responding to him is reminding him that you can glorify and serve God and live out your purpose, even in stillness, even in faith, even through living a life of devotion that isn't one that has to be this productive. And a lot of people want to read this cast against the backdrop of the reassertion of Protestantism that man is not saved by acts but by faith alone, which I do think is a helpful context for this. But taken out of that context, I also think it is a really helpful reminder for any of us, whether you are a Christian or not, that your life is served well, not just being productive, but lived intentionally and thoughtfully and meaningfully. One of the things that speaks to me particularly about this poem is that I often tend to measure my days by productivity of things accomplished. I love to make a list and to cross things off that list and to check things off that list and to be able to look at a project and see progress made, right? I began writing and I was at 3,000 words. Now I'm at 4,500 words. That's success. And it's good to set goals and to be able to look at markers like that. But then it can also give you this sense when you need a break or when you need time off of guilt for a lazy day. And I'll feel that. I got nothing done today, right? And it can be very difficult to then just sort of sit and be. But that seems to me to be the true business of living, is sitting and being. Not advocating laziness. Obviously, the house needs cleaned and the bills need paid. But to not make the list and check things off the list, but to live a life that's fully present and aware and loving is as important, as meaningful. I think you could argue in our world, perhaps more so, to slow down and to pay attention. A couple things just about the form. When I first read this, I thought, oh, that's strange. He was known for having such strong sonnet form, and yet this poem doesn't rhyme. It does. Spent, wide, hide, bent. Present, chide, denied, prevent. Need, best, state, speed, rest, wait. So it follows that Petrarchan sonnet formula that we talked about, but it seemed while reading that it didn't rhyme because every single line in this poem, except for line 7 and line 14, is enjambed. And I think that Milton might have done this in order to achieve the effect of feeling conditional statements, when I consider how my light is spent, but also to depict that he's having feelings and thoughts and ideas that spill outside their normal containers. So then the ones that are punctuated at the end of their line seem to stand more strongly. For example, in line 7, doth God exact day, labor, light denied. That one actually is enjambed within his quotation, but it begins on its own. The previous line had stopped at chide. And then the last line, they also serve who only stand and wait. That's the only line, as far as I can tell, that isn't enjambed, and it gives the answer to the problem in the poem, which is that you can serve and glorify God and have a meaningful life by just living and living intentionally and thoughtfully. overall, I was just drawn to and touched by this poem because to think of John Milton as one of the most important writers in the English language, and that he had this moment, at least a moment, perhaps longer, but of internal struggle, not just with his blindness and the disability that he was experiencing at that time, but also of feeling as though he hadn't accomplished much, and that if he couldn't continue to accomplish, that his life was somewhat empty. And to hear that coming from the person who wrote Paradise Lost, I think is very humanizing. So it'll serve for me today as a reminder um, to find meaning in the times in which we stand and wait. So with that thought, thank you again for joining us, and peace be with all of you.